Let's take some time now to look at a few aspects of basic aircraft handling. We'll talk a little about trim, high altitude operations, stalls, spins, and dive recovery. First though, let's get the aircraft set up. Set 2325 RPM with the prop lever and 35 inches of mercury manifold pressure with the throttle for a standard cruise. Keep flying straight ahead with the wings level. Press spacebar when you're ready. Okay, first thing, let's get the aircraft trim squared away so you don't have to concentrate so much on flying the aircraft. We've seen the 3 trim controls for elevator, aileron, and rudder already, but always in the context of takeoff where specific settings are required. Now that we're in the air, the trim that's required will change dynamically depending on things like airspeed, engine torque, wind direction, fuel state, and aircraft stores loading. Right now, you'll notice that flying straight and level requires some force on your stick and rudder. We want to cancel those forces out using trim so that no input is required to keep the aircraft straight and level. Press spacebar to continue. First, use elevator trim to cancel out the fore and aft force on the stick. You can eyeball level flight by looking at the horizon or reference the rate of climb indicator or artificial horizon on the main instrument panel. Airspeed is the main factor that affects elevator trim, so expect to adjust this quite often in flight. Press spacebar to continue. Aileron and rudder trim are a little trickier because any change to one will influence the other. The good news is that they require fewer changes than elevator trim once they're set. Airspeed has an effect on these, but torque from engine RPM changes will probably require the most attention here. One technique is to use rudder trim first to cancel out any rudder force, then use aileron trim to cancel out any bank on the stick, although you can do this in any order. You can gauge the trim required for coordinated flight by checking the main instrument panel's bank and turn indicator. Center the bubble with rudder trim, then center the needle with aileron trim. Trim will change constantly, so it doesn't have to be perfect, just enough to ease the burden of holding the aircraft straight and level. Press spacebar to continue when you're set. For now, we're shooting for straight and level flight, but you can also trim for a climb or descent, or set it up to hold you in a turn. It's inaccurate to say you'll be flying the aircraft with trim, but you can almost think of it that way. This will become natural and instinctive after a few flights. Now, moving on, we started the lesson up at 20,000 feet, so let's take a moment to look at high altitude flight. Increase RPM to 2550 and manifold pressure to 42 inches of mercury and trim to hold us in the climb. Press spacebar to continue. The two most important systems at high altitude are your oxygen and supercharger. The cockpit is not pressurized, so you'll need supplemental breathing oxygen to survive up this high. Always verify your oxygen regulator is set to auto and check your oxygen pressure gauge periodically. The red oxygen warning light next to the gauge comes on when you're running low. If you run out, you'll need to descend or risk losing consciousness. Press spacebar to continue. The P-47 was designed for high altitude and includes a very capable turbo supercharger. The idea is to route engine exhaust and cold air through a high-speed turbine and then return that compressed, supercharged air to the combustion chambers. This increases the available manifold pressure far beyond what's available using the throttle alone. The amount of air used, and therefore the supercharger's turbine RPM, is controlled using the boost lever that's currently linked to the throttle. Press spacebar to continue. To demonstrate this, unlink the boost lever from the throttle by clicking the interconnection latch. Then pull the boost lever back slightly. You'll see two things: the supercharger's turbine RPM at the top right of the instrument panel and the engine manifold pressure will decrease. You'll have less engine power and may not be able to maintain the climb. Try that if you would like, then return the boost lever to the throttle. Remember though, never advance the boost lever past the throttle. This can create a pressure buildup and blow the seals in the air ducting. If that happens, you'll not be able to build up pressure and will likely have to descend. Press spacebar to continue. As we climb, the supercharger will have to work harder and harder to provide enough air to maintain the set manifold pressure. We'll eventually reach a point where the turbine RPM is too high and we'll need to pull the boost lever back. You'll watch for the red turbine overspeed warning light to illuminate, showing the RPM has exceeded the red line value of 22,000. At that point, pull the lever back until the light goes out. You'll eventually reach a point where the throttle is wide open and the supercharger will no longer be able to maintain a high manifold pressure, or the intercooler is no longer able to keep the air temperature within safe limits. That's as high as you're going to go. Feel free to explore this more if you would wish, but return to around 25 to 30,000 feet, straight and level before moving on. Engine settings are at your discretion from here on out, but watch those temperatures. Press spacebar when you're ready to move on and we'll look at stalls and spin recovery. So far, we've had the aircraft in climb quite a bit, and the airspeed has likely been low at times. Low speed means the wings are at higher angle of attack in relation to the flight path. When that angle is too high, the smooth airflow that provides lift is disrupted, lift is lost, and the aircraft enters a stall. You'll be able to recognize this very easily because the aircraft will begin to shudder and the controls will become sluggish. This is sometimes referred to as buffeting. To recover, simply relax any back pressure on the stick and lower the nose to gain airspeed. Slow down some and give that a try now if you would like. Press spacebar to continue. The aircraft is very aerodynamically stable, especially with an empty auxiliary fuel tank and no stores, but a stall can develop into a spin under certain conditions. This will usually be during aggressive maneuvering where you may not notice the onset of a stall. A normal spin is entered when one wing is completely stalled, but the other side still provides some lift. This will cause the nose to dip, and the flight controls will have little or no effect due to the disturbed airflow. The aircraft will descend in an out-of-control corkscrew motion. Press spacebar to continue. The aircraft will likely recover from a normal spin on its own within a few turns, but that will cost you a lot of altitude. To initiate a quick recovery, apply full opposite rudder, stick against the spin that's in the same direction as the rudder, and slight back pressure on the stick. You can also advance the throttle to help regain speed if needed. This should allow the aircraft to recover within one half turn and only cost you about 1,000 feet of altitude. You can try that now if you would like, or do it later on your own. We're going to look at dive recovery from a high altitude later, so it would be best to stay above 20,000 feet if you do give this a try now. An easy way to enter a normal spin is to level off, decrease speed until you stall, then smoothly apply the arc stick and full rudder in the direction you wish to spin. Press spacebar to continue when you're ready to move on. It's also possible to enter a much more serious flat spin, either upright or inverted on your back. Both wings will have lost all lift, so instead of the normal nose-down corkscrew motion, the aircraft will remain level and fall like a leaf. You'll need a little luck to recover from either of these, especially the inverted variety. Expect to lose at least 10,000 feet. If you descend below 10,000 feet in a flat spin, bail out, jettison the canopy, and lift control E 3 times. To recover from an upright flat spin, apply some opposite rudder, advance the throttle, and apply stick in the direction of the spin, opposite the rudder. And for an inverted flat spin, apply full stick in the direction you appear to be turning, and slight back pressure on the stick. Feel free to give those a shot at some point, but it would be best to do those on your own later. Press spacebar to continue. Go ahead and climb back up to about 25,000 feet and level off if you're not already. We're going to look briefly at a very common but potentially dangerous task of diving the aircraft. You'll use dives most often for weapons delivery, dive bombing against pinpoint targets, or as an escape maneuver during air combat. The dive can be entered by either rolling the aircraft, pulling down and rolling back out, or by gently pushing the nose down. Be careful not to put too much negative G on the aircraft while nosing over though, as that can starve the engine of oil if done for more than about 7 seconds. If you have time to set it up before you dive, trim the aircraft slightly tail heavy to aid in recovery later, and close the cowl flaps to prevent damage from overspeed. Also, decrease manifold pressure before starting. The pressure will increase as you descend, so it's possible to overboost the engine if you're not careful. Press spacebar to continue. Now for a normal dive recovery, simply apply smooth back pressure to the stick and recover gradually. But the main risk during a dive is too much airspeed that can lead to compressibility and loss of aircraft control. Compressibility happens when shock waves form near or on the control surfaces as the aircraft nears the speed of sound. That can freeze the controls in place. For dive bombing, it's not a common problem because you're in control of the airspeed you begin the dive from. For air combat, however, you'll from time to time be in a tough spot with something on your tail and need to push the aircraft to its limits. That's where you'll encounter these out-of-control conditions the most. Remember, the higher the altitude, the lower the airspeed where compressibility becomes a factor. Also, never perform a vertical dive from above 30,000 feet. That's certain to result in excessive speed. Also, it's counterintuitive, but never decrease power during dive recovery. That can just cause the nose to dip even more. Increase power if the dive tends to steepen. Press spacebar to continue. You'll recognize compressibility in a dive by lack of elevator response and a tendency for the nose to dip. To recover, hold steady back pressure on the stick, but don't attempt to hold back on it all the way just yet. That'll do no good until the altitude is below 18,000 feet. Then lower the compressibility recovery flaps. They'll help control the airspeed on the way down. At 18,000 feet, apply strong back pressure to the stick until the elevators become effective. You should get some response by 15,000 feet. If you're still out of control at that point, apply all the elevator trim you can to pull the nose up. Now, this is not something that would ever be done intentionally during flight training, but give it a shot now if you would like. This is the last item that's going to be covered in this lesson. Press spacebar to continue and we'll wrap up. Well, that was a look at some basic aircraft handling specific to the P-47. It would be a good idea to practice trimming the aircraft and stall recovery some more before moving on to the next lesson that covers landing. Try it at different altitudes and different aircraft configurations, like with flaps and gear extended. We'll be flying at low speed very close to the ground, so that could save us some trouble later on. When you're ready, I'll see you in the next lesson. Press spacebar to continue on your own, or escape to exit this lesson at any time.